You're standing in a dark nursery at 3 in the morning, a crib with padded rails, a video monitor glowing on the dresser, a white noise machine in the corner, a nightlight shaped like a star, a drawer of sterilized bottles, and an app on your phone counting every feed, every nap, every diaper. You lower a sleeping baby into the crib, step back, and watch the screen for a moment before you leave. For almost all of human history, none of this existed. No crib, no baby monitor, no app, no nightlight, no sterilized bottles. No pediatrician on call. No 4 solid walls and a locked door standing between your baby and the dark. So how did ancient humans keep their babies alive? The short answer is that a lot of them didn't. The long answer is way more interesting, and it quietly changes what you think a baby actually needs. If videos like this make you wonder how people really lived, subscribe and hit the bell. It's the one thing that keeps these going. Let's start with the reality. For about 300,000 years, modern humans lived in small mobile bands, usually 15 to 50 people who knew each other their whole lives. There were no hospitals, no medicine in any form you'd recognize, no safe way to treat a fever, a snake bite, or an infected cut. A baby born into this world faced odds that are hard to sit with. Across foraging societies that researchers have studied, somewhere around a quarter of infants died before their first birthday, and close to half of all children did not reach the age of 15. Half. That number is the background hum of the entire human past. Every parent, you are descended from buried children and kept going. So when we ask how ancient humans protected their babies, we are not asking about a system that worked perfectly. We are asking what they did with the tools they had against odds we would find unbearable. And what they did was build the baby into the group so tightly that the baby was almost never alone. That's the first pattern. Constant contact. In modern life, a baby spends a lot of time set down. In a crib, a car seat, a bouncer, a stroller, a high chair. For most of human history, a baby spent its first years being carried. Skin against skin, then wrapped in a sling of soft hide or woven plant fiber, riding on a hip or a back while the mother walked, dug, gathered, and talked. The anthropologist Melvin Connors spent years with the Juhansi of the Kalahari, sometimes called the Kung. He found that infants were in physical contact with someone for most of the day and night. They were nursed in short bursts, often every 15 minutes or so, not on a schedule but whenever they stirred. They slept beside their mothers. They almost never cried alone, because someone was always within arm's reach to answer. Think about it like this. A modern baby's day is a series of placements and pickups. An ancient baby's day was one long carry. That carrying did something invisible and important. A baby pressed against a warm body stays the right temperature. A baby that nurses constantly gets a steady trickle of antibodies through the milk. A baby that is never set down on the ground is a baby that a snake, an insect, or an animal cannot easily reach. Protection wasn't a wall or a gate. Protection was a body. There was a piece of technology in this, even if it doesn't look like one. The baby sling may be one of the oldest tools our species ever made. We can't dig up a sling because soft hide and woven fiber rot away and leave nothing for archaeologists to find. What we can say is that a mother who could tie her baby to her body had her hands free to dig, gather, and work, while the child stayed warm, fed, and watched. A sling is not a weapon or a blade, so it rarely gets called an invention. It may have done more to keep our ancestors alive than either. And that body was rarely just the mother's. Here's where it gets interesting. We tend to picture the prehistoric family as a mother alone with her child, maybe a father off hunting somewhere. The real picture looks nothing like that. The anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy spent a career arguing that humans are what she calls cooperative breeders. We are one of the few primates where a mother routinely hands her newborn to other people in the first hours and days of life and trusts them to help raise it. Hrdy's term for these other carers is alloparents, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, cousins, unrelated women in the band. In many groups studied, a newborn is held, soothed, and carried by a dozen different people in its first weeks. The Effie of the Congo, studied by Edward Tronick, were a clear case. An Effie infant might be passed among many caregivers in a single hour, nursed at times by women who were not its mother. A baby with one exhausted carer is fragile. A baby with 10 carers is protected by a web. If the mother is sick, foraging, giving birth again, or simply asleep, the baby does not fall through a gap. Someone else has it. Think for a second about what actually killed infants back then. Cold, in the first fragile weeks. Hunger, when food ran short. Infection, from a cut or a fever with no treatment. Animals and accidents, for a child left alone for even a moment. The forager system answered each one without ever naming it. A carried baby stayed warm. A constantly nursed baby was fed and dosed with the mother's immunity. A baby ringed by people was never the one left alone. The care looks gentle, but every part of it was doing a hard job. And the carers were not only women. The anthropologist Barry Hewlett lived with the Aka of Central Africa and measured something that surprised him. Aka fathers held or stayed within arm's reach of their infants for a large part of the day, more than fathers in almost any other society on record. The Aka baby grew up knowing many warm bodies, male and female, as ordinary safety. Care was not one person's job, it was the band's job. And one carer mattered more than almost any other: the grandmother. The anthropologist Kristen Hawkes studied the Hadza of Tanzania and noticed something about the older women. They were not slowing down. They were among the hardest workers in the band, digging tubers, gathering, and feeding their grandchildren so that their daughters could have the next baby sooner. Hawkes built this into what's called the grandmother hypothesis, the idea that human women live long past their childbearing years for a reason. A surviving grandmother is extra hands, extra food, and extra protection for every child she is related to. In a world with no formula and no daycare, a grandmother was a survival machine. When a baby did start on solid food, there was no jar and no blender. The food was made soft by hand and by mouth. Across many traditional groups, mothers and grandmothers pre-chewed tough roots, meat, and plants and passed the softened food to the child. It sounds strange to a modern ear, but it worked. It turned adult food into something a baby could swallow, and it carried helpful microbes from an adult's mouth into the child's gut. The first baby food was simply a grown-up's meal, shared the hard way. There was also a hidden form of protection nobody planned: spacing. Because a forager mother nursed her baby constantly. For years, her body usually did not become fertile again quickly. Births tended to fall 3 or 4 years apart on their own. That gap meant each child got a long stretch as the youngest, carried and fed, before a new baby arrived. No mother was trying to feed 2 infants at once. The biology spaced the children out, and the spacing kept them alive. The third pattern is the one we forget because it sounds too simple: fire and the circle. At night, the band slept close together around a fire. The fire did 3 jobs at once. It kept the cold off small bodies that lose heat fast. It kept large animals at a distance, because almost nothing wild wants to walk into flame. And it meant there was always a faint glow and usually someone half awake, tending it, while the babies slept in the middle of the group. Think about where the baby slept. Not at the edge, in the center. Surrounded by sleeping adults, ringed by fire, in the safest square meter the band could build. The whole sleeping arrangement was a set of nested shields, and the smallest, most vulnerable person lay at the heart of it. A baby sleeping alone in a separate room would have been the most dangerous thing the band could do, not the safest. A baby asleep on its mother's chest had its breathing, its temperature, and its smallest cry monitored all night by a person who would wake before any alarm could. The thing we now build machines and separate rooms to replace was once just another body, breathing a few inches away. So that is the system. Carry the baby constantly, share the baby among many carers, space the births, sleep the baby in the center by the fire. No tools, no walls, just bodies, attention, and arrangement. Now here's the part that's hard for modern people to understand. None of this was a parenting style. There was no other option. You could not put a baby in another room because there were no rooms. You could not check a monitor because you were the monitor. You could not hire help because help wasn't bought. It was owed and repaid between people who would live and die together. And we have real evidence that this care ran deep, all the way to the grave. In Uhlau, in Germany, archaeologists uncovered burials around 4,600 years old. In one grave, 2 adults lay facing 2 children, arms arranged around them, the bodies positioned as a family in death the way they had been in life. DNA confirmed that the adults were the parents of the children buried with them. It is one of the oldest physical signs we have of a nuclear family, and of people who, when the worst happened, laid their children down with care and stayed beside them. That tells you something words can't. The pull to protect a child did not arrive with cribs and pediatricians. It is old. It is in the ground. It was there long before anyone wrote a single word down. So when did all of this start to change? Agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago. When people stopped moving and started farming, almost everything about childhood shifted. Families grew larger and were born closer together because a settled mother nursing less often became fertile again sooner. Babies were weaned earlier onto grain porridge instead of milk. More children, born faster, fed on softer and poorer food, packed into denser settlements where disease moved easily from house to house. In some ways, settled life was harder on babies, not easier. The constant caring faded as mothers were tied to fields and grindstones. The web of carers got tangled by property, walls, and households that no longer shared everything. The baby moved out of the center of the group and into a smaller, more separate circle. The same change that built villages and grain stores quietly pulled apart the web of carers that had kept babies alive for 250,000 years. It took thousands more years and the arrival of medicine, sanitation, and clean water before infant survival actually climbed. The crib and the monitor are very recent inventions sitting on top of a much older story. So here's the answer. Ancient humans protected their babies by refusing to let them be alone. The protection wasn't a structure. It was a pattern of bodies. A baby carried all day, nursed constantly, passed between many hands, fathered closely, watched by grandmothers, spaced from the next child, and slept in the warm center of a sleeping group, ringed by fire. They had no way to stop most of the things that killed children. What they could do was make sure that for every hour a child was alive, someone was holding on. You stand in that quiet nursery at 3 in the morning, watching a screen instead of holding a baby, and it can feel like progress and loneliness at the same time. The walls keep the dark out. They also keep everyone else out. For roughly 290 years, a human baby almost never slept alone and almost never woke without a body to answer it. Then we built rooms and walls and monitors, and we have been learning to put our babies down ever since.